Washington's pointless war on behalf of a fake nation. This is what Stockman slams as a position of the United States concerning Ukraine, authored by David Stockman via Contra Corner blog on Zero Hedge. Most of us have forgotten that the European borders were set after World War II, and this has to do with Ukraine as well. Messages coming in loud and clear today from the crashing pound to repudiation of establishment governments in Italy, Sweden, and more to come, to Hungarian Prime Minister Orban's call to end the sanctions war and to do so pronto. So let's be clear, Washington's daughter-headed intervention in the intramural spat between Russia and Ukraine and the accompanying global sanctions war is surely the stupidest, most destructive project to arise from the banks of the Potomac in modern times, and the architects of this perfidious folly, Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, Newland, etc., cannot be condemned harshly enough. Now, it's my humble opinion that some people should learn how to keep their mouths shut. Biden, Newland, and Blinken, just some of them. I don't know, maybe it's like a woman in labor. She just can't keep her mouth shut when she's in tremendous pain as she's giving birth, but this is ridiculous. Now, after all, going back to the article, after all, this madness is being pursued in the name of abstract policy norms, the rule of law and sanctity of borders that make Washington a laughingstock more than any other nation on planet Earth, and by a long shot, it has serially and blatantly violated these standard scores of times in recent decades. Among other actions, Washington's interventions in Serbia, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Yemen, Syria, Somalia, and there's a lot more, etc., were not only pointless, they were also self-evident violation of the very rule of law and sanctity of borders, upon which Washington now beats its breast over even more stridently. Moreover, by wallowing in this unhinged hypocrisy, Washington has abandoned every semblance of common sense as to why this conflict happened in the first place and why it is wholly irrelevant to the national security of the American homeland, or for that matter, Europe as well. The fundamental fact is, aside from the historically shorter interval of iron-fisted communist rule during the Soviet era, Ukraine had never been a nation-state within its post-1991 happenstance borders. In fact, for upwards of 275 years before 1918, much of its territories were borderlands, vassals, and outright provinces of Tsarist Russia, and before that, constituents of the Polish-Lithuanian Empire and others. So we are not dealing with the invasion of a long-established ethnically, linguistically coherent state by its aggressive neighbor, but with the leftover potpourri of separate tongues, territories, economies, and histories that were smashed together by brutal communist rulers between 1918 and 1991. Accordingly, the fast approaching dark cold winter of stagflationary collapse in Europe is not being done in heroic defense of the grand principles offered by Washington and NATO. To the contrary, it amounts to the pointless and grubby business of preserving a vile status quo ante that was confected on the lands north of the Black Sea, that is Ukraine, and by the ordinary course of historical evolution and nation-state accretion, but by the bloody hands of Lenin, Stalin, and Khrushchev. In any event, the staggering economic cost for the everyday people of Europe in pursuit of such a threadbare and illegitimate purpose is starting to register among the long-suffering victims of Brussels' elites rulers. Hence, the thunderbolts from the Italian elections this weekend and Viktor Orban's parallel appeal to the European Union to lift sanctions and thereby potentially reduce energy prices by half in one swell swoop. Nor is Orban of Hungary the only one calling for an end to sanctions, with Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis calling for a repeal of Russian sanctions as well. Other political leaders such as Matteo Salvini, who heads the Conservative League Party, and will be a major force in Italy's new government, says that Europe needs a rethink on Russian sanctions due to the harmful economic effects on Europe, of course. Likewise, the Conservative Alternative for Germany, AfD party, has also been pushing for an end to sanctions and a reopening of the Nord Stream 1 and 2 gas pipelines due to the soaring energy costs in Germany. AfD member of the Bundestag, Mariana Harder-Kühnel, for instance, recently echoed Orban's call. Well, it could be another reason why these Nord Stream 1 and 2, which are no longer in use, have been attacked, because they support Germany with natural gas. Now, she said the EU bureaucracy has turned the screw on the sanctions, and now we are paying the bill. As we know, Germany is quickly going down the abyss because it has no energy, not only for its production, but even for its populace. Going back to this, in this context, the ructions since Friday in the FX market for the pound sterling speak more powerfully than anything else. The British pound briefly plunged to its lowest level ever early this week, touching $1.0349 during Asian trading hours, breaking through its previous record low of 1985. Moreover, today's cliff dive followed a tumble of 3% on Friday after the new Truss government announced sweeping tax cuts and a massive energy bailout for businesses and individuals. Likewise, the price of UK government debt has fallen in tandem with the pound, with yields rising sharply again today. The 10-year government bond was yielding 4.11%, up 28 basis points from Friday, and a staggering 342% from the 0.93 yield of just a year ago. For want of doubt, here's the path of pound sterling over the last 12 months. It's a massive thumbs down by the FX markets, the foreign exchange markets, and if there's ever was one. Now, what's actually going to destroy the remnants of the UK fiscal sustainability is Truss' utterly foolish plan to freeze all energy prices for all citizens and businesses at costs of upwards of $200 billion a year, or 5% of the UK GDP. But that's neocon insanity run amok. If London wants to reveal its consumers of onerous energy prices and utility bills, it only needs to follow Orban's advice and terminate its sanctions war against Russian energy, food, and other commodity exports, and it would not cost the exchequer a dime. That is to say, the pound's crash ought to be a general wake-up call to all of Europe and Washington too, by declaring war on the productive and peaceful commerce with Russia that previously prevailed. Europe's leaders, especially the new government of the United Kingdom, Truss that is, have sacrificed their own prosperity and the living standards of their citizens in behalf of a prodigiously corrupt, anti-democratic regime in Kiev that is dedicated to preserving intact nothing more than the dead hand of the Soviet Presidium. Now, as our friend James Howard Kushner rightly summarized, let us agree that the place called Ukraine was never any of America's business. For centuries we ignored it through all the colorful cavalry charges to and fro of Turks and Tartars, the reign of the dashing Zaporozhian Cossacks, the cruel abuses of Stalin, then Hitler and the dull grey Khrushchev to Yeltsin years. But then, having destroyed Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, and sundry other places, all in a great hegemonic lark, the professional warmongers of our land and their catamites in Washington made Ukraine their next special project. They engineered the 2014 coup in Kiev that ousted the elected president, Mr. Yanukovych, to set up a giant grifting parlor and international money laundromat. The other strategic aim was to prepare Ukraine for NATO membership, which would have made it, in effect, a forward missile base right up against Russia's border because, well, Russia. So we return to the question at hand. Every Ukrainian presidential election since 1991 has revealed a nation radically split between pro-Russian populations in the east and south and anti-Russian nationalists in the center and west. West is where Kiev is. when the mailed first fist of communist rule was removed. In fact, Ukraine became a territory yearning to be partitioned into more amenable jurisdictions of governance. For instance, here is the result of the 2010 election that put a pro-Russian politician in the president's office and at a length gave rise to Washington's putsch during the Maidan uprising that soon drove the country into civil war. So the above map barely does justice to the actual figures. In many of the yellow Tymoshenko supporting areas, the vote was 80% or higher in favor of the latter's nationalist candidacy, while in much of the blue areas, the pro-Russian Yanukovych won by similar massive pluralities. Yet, this was not a one-time fluke of short-term electoral policies. It was actually the recurrences of the manner in which the fake nation of Ukraine was put together during the last 3 centuries. Prior to the end of World War I, there was no Ukrainian state, like the artificial and unsustainable polities of Czechoslovakia and Yugoslavia, which were confected by self-serving politicians at Versailles, especially the domestic vote-seeking Woodrow Wilson. Ukraine was a product of geopolitical engineering, in this case by the new rulers of the Soviet Union. Indeed, the historical provenance of Ukraine can be described in a nutshell. What was to become Ukraine joined Russia in 1654 when Bohad Khmelnytsky, a hetman of the Zaporozhye host, petitioned Russian Tsar Alexei to accept the Zaporozhye host into Russia. That is to say, Imperial Russia spawned the latter-day polity of Ukraine by annexing into its service the fearsome Cossack warriors who inhabited the central region. The army and a small territory then under hetman control was called Ukraine, which means in Russia, at the edge, a term that had originated in the 12th century to describe lands on the border of Russia. During the next 250 years, the expansionist czars annexed more and more of the adjacent territory, designating the eastern and southern regions as Novorussia, Novorossiya, New Russia, which territories include Catherine the Great's purchase of Crimea from the Turks, the Ottomans, in 1783. That is to say, at the time of America's own independence, the heart of today's Ukraine was ruled by the long arm of the Tsarist autocracy of Russia. After the Bolshevik Revolution, of course, the map changed drastically. In 1919, Lenin created the Socialist State of Ukraine on part of the territory of the former Russian Empire. Ukraine officially became the Ukrainian People's Republic, with the capital of Kharkov, that's in East Ukraine, in 1922, moved to Kiev in 1934. Accordingly, the new communist state swallowed up Novorossiya, per the eastern and southern portions of the green area in the map, including Donetsk and Lugansk regions, as well as the Kherson and Zaporizhia regions bordering the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea that are sites of today's Russia-sponsored secession referendums. And these are all the areas that have gone to Russia with the recent referendum. Then, in 1939, as a result of the infamous Nazi-Soviet pact, Stalin annexed the eastern territories of Poland, as designated by the yellow areas of the map. Thus, the historic territory of Galicia and the Polish city of Lvov were incorporated into Ukraine by the joint decree of Stalin and Hitler. In June of 1940, Stalin next annexed northern Bukovina, the brown area below. Okay, that's at the 7 o'clock position here. Taken together, these Stalinist seizures are now known as Western Ukraine, the peoples of which understandably do not cotton to things Russian. At the same time, the 85% Russian-speaking population inhabiting the purple area, that's Crimea, was gifted to Ukraine by Khrushchev in 1954 for the very reason of extending his own accession to the communist dictatorship. Nevertheless, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, Ukraine inherited these communist confected borders within which there were upwards of 40 million Russians, Poles, Hungarians, Romanians, Tatars, and countless lesser nationalities, all trapped in a newly declared country in which they did not especially wish to reside. And let's remember they could not even leave their countries. Now, indeed, the reason that the hapless state of Ukraine needs relief in partition, not a war to preserve the handiwork, if Tsars and Commissars was well summarized by Alexander Markovich in The American Thinker. He said, "Today's Ukrainian civil war is thus greatly exacerbated by the fact that unlike pluralistic societies such as the US, Canada, Switzerland, and Russia, which are tolerant of different cultures, religions, and languages, Ukraine is not. Unsurprisingly, devotion to pluralism proved not to be her forte, even though the Kiev regime had no historical roots in the real estate it inhabited. The imposed Ukrainian rules and the Ukrainian language and non-Ukrainian people after declaring independence. As a result, pro-Russian sentiments, ranging from the recognition of the official status of the Russian language to outright secession, that have always been prevalent in Crimea and eastern Ukraine. Western Ukraine has always gravitated towards its Polish, Romanian, and Hungarian roots. Emphatically anti-Russian, Poland may not miss this strategic opportunity to reacquire its land and avenge the humiliation inflicted by the Yalta Conference. The West's insistence on maintaining the status quo of the Ukrainian borders established by Lenin, Stalin, and Hitler exposes the disconnect between strategic doctrine and moral principles. Indeed, the people of Poland make no secret of their ambition. Polish President Andrzej Duda recently declared, "For decades and maybe, God forbid, for centuries, there will be no more borders between our countries, Poland and Ukraine. There'll be no such border," he said. Romania is not far behind, especially in light of many inhabitants of former northern Bukovina already carrying Romanian passports. The territory of Ukraine is a mosaic of other people's lands. If we want to stop this insane war and ensure peace in Europe, instead of calling Russia-sponsored referendum in Eastern Europe a sham, we should conduct an honest referendum in all the disputed territories under the auspices of the UN and let people decide what government they want. Needless to say, partition of the fake state of Ukraine is not remotely on Washington's mind. After all, it would remove the latest neocon reason for spending the blessings of forever wars to the fairest parts of the planet. And this is by David Stockman via Contract Corner blog on Zero Hedge. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. So that's a rehash of the Ukrainian unity of various other countries and the recent history of it. Please leave your comments. Thank you for your support. Kindly support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.